Hi, Nicole.
Hi, Leah.
I'm so excited. It's
Me?
5 o'clock. It's 5 o'clock at my house, and it's basically the same day in Seattle that you're probably having.
Yes, at 8 o'clock.
So, I mean, we had like 3 days of sun, and we're like, it's summer, and now we're like, no, it's not.
Absolutely. You know what? Like we've had a string of good ones.
Yeah.
I'm gonna just look. There's some sun
Right.
out there. I'll take it.
Awesome. So, how do we know each other, Nicole?
Oh wow! Like through a mutual friend,
Yes.
a mutual Denver, Colorado friend, who had the bright idea. We owe him a debt of gratitude.
Yes, we do.
Who had the bright idea when he discovered that both of us were in Seattle that we should meet each other,
Yeah.
and the wisdom in his suggestion is unmatched. Like you are my tribe, you are my people.
Yeah, for sure. We had like burritos with some green chili, and that was the rest of it.
Hmm.
So that was, that was it.
Burritos and green chili consumed since then. I'm very proud to say.
Yeah, same. So like one of the things that I do with my blog that I haven't done yet, so you get to be the first. But one of the things I want to do with my blog is also highlight and introduce people that are in my life that are creative and have done cool creative things. So on my blog, I write a lot about leadership and culture and things I care about and books and all these kind of bits and pieces of my life, and I bring them together in my blog. And my blog was built for me by another young lady who's a creative who's done a great job sort of revamping everything in my space. But one of the things I want to do is introduce my friends and my creative friends and what kind of their artistic creations and talk about them. So that's why I want to talk to you today.
Well, I am delighted to be here and thank you for the opportunity to talk
So
about
Nicole,
stuff.
that's right. And Nicole is like she's like every woman. Like ever since I've met her, she's worked in corporate jobs, she's written books, she's written songs, she sings jazz, she is a grandma, she does all of the things, right? And so that for me has been fun to watch. But this like latest journey is like my favorite. All the other journeys were awesome, but this latest one is my favorite because I kind of
I
got to
tend to agree. I agree with you. Yeah, yeah,
so it's like feels like everything was going this way. So that's been
right.
really fun. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So in January of last year, 2020, when I was home for Christmas and I came by your house, you showed me this new thing that you had in your house. And I was like, all right, what do we got? And you showed me this altar in your house.
Yes. I was like, what new
What
thing?
did I have? Right.
Yes, absolutely.
And so I think for me, like now, having seen that, I see sort of the threads of it through everything up to now. So I think we should come back and talk about your altar a little bit and what it means. But I
Ab-
would love for you to tell me about this book, this beautiful book.
I will. I'm happy to do that.
Yes.
I wrote a book that was illustrated by my close personal friend, Stephen Luna. It's called Aisha. Well, the series is Aisha and the Ancestors, and the book is called A Birthday Party for Great Granny. It's a picture book. This is the first of what will be many in the Aisha and the Ancestors series. It is essentially about the Black family, Black culture, Black community, Black contribution, Black spirituality, in particular, ancestor veneration. And this book was inspired by a confluence of events. The primary event that sort of centers this book was the transition of my father, Robert Andrew Kennard, last June. He passed away, and the resulting conversations that I had with my grandsons is really what prompted the idea for this book and ultimately my execution and writing it and getting it illustrated and then self-publishing it.
Yeah, it's I mean, when I first of all, I'm a big Uncle Ronnie fan.
Yes.
Like, for the record, I think Uncle Ronnie might be the coolest guy in the book.
Uncle Ronnie has the moves.
He does. He's moving. He's got it, right? So I'm a big Uncle Ronnie fan. But so I mean, obviously, in having known you and know your family and everything, like watching sort of the progression of your dad towards the end of his life, and obviously then the passing. Your grandkids, your boys, grandboys, they were little, but also had a relationship with him.
Absolutely.
And so, talk a little bit about how that relationship they had with him, as well as the relationship your sons had with him, since you were such a young mom, how that sort of created this discussion that you had.
Absolutely. It's, my grandsons did not live close to my grandparents, their grandparents, my parents, but had the occasion to see them on like special events or holidays. And sadly, like much of the time, my father was ill, like he was sick over a long period of time. And so they were accustomed to seeing him sort of unwell. And I honestly think that created a deep sense of tenderness, especially from Aaron, my older grandson, who was just able to discern more. And so it was Aaron when Pawpaw passed away, who expressed such grief and but really trying to understand what happened. And the conversation uh, immediately following my father's transition was, they call me Lala. He came up and said, Lala, I'm so sorry that Pawpaw died. And I said, me too. I regret that you won't have the opportunity to know him well. You would have loved one another. And Aaron looked at me as if I had spoken like a different language. He was like, what do you mean I don't get to know him? You can tell me all about him. And in that way, I mean, that just is such a simple illustration of what ancestor veneration is, really. All it is sort of the ritualizing of remembrance, taking deliberate, intentional moments to remember our ancestors, known and unknown, right? Like African Americans have a complicated relationship with ancestry in the United States, right? So it's reclaiming those stories, it's acknowledging community growth and contribution, even in oppressive situations, and just saying thank you to our ancestors for merely surviving and for living beyond only survival, but contributing to our families and our society and in culture and that kind of thing.
Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about this, because I knew we were going to talk about this, and I've been reading lately this new book that Oprah and this doctor have out. And one of the things they talk a lot about is this concept like of epigenetics, right? Where your genes can literally change, and they're not changed forever, but they're changed. And when you pass them on, they're changed in the new person that has them and the new person that has them. And so when I think about this kind of cultural dynamic, certainly in the US with the Black community, the Black culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
That passing and passing and passing. And just the conversation you had with Aaron could mean that the genes there turn
Absolutely.
off or on differently.
Yes,
Right.
absolutely.
And that in and of itself is such a I mean, I know your dad, right? And he would be so glad to have
Yes,
that change, right? That
yes,
Aaron walks into his future with something new. You have your situation and it's something new. Your boys, Aaron's, his generations after him, and just that switch of like, we're not gonna,
it's
yeah,
healing. It's
yeah,
healing generational systemic trauma,
yeah,
right? Like it,
yeah.
um, I don't know a lot about African traditional religions. I've,
Mhm.
I've learned online this time of COVID and sheltering in place, like the classroom is now your laptop. Um, but learning about healing, ancestral wounds, which are prevalent in the Black community in the
Yeah.
States. And so, literally, like, I have been reading slave narratives and with such empathy and just praying that as my awareness grows of all the ways in which healing remains, yet to manifest, like how I can contribute to the conversation, like you said, going forward, how I can talk about my personal ancestors, but our common ancestors, and elevate their contribution above only the stories we've been told in our classrooms, which have their own agenda, right? Like,
Yeah,
so
yeah, totally.
it's beautiful. I heard that podcast with Oprah and the doctor whose name I can't remember either. Um,
Bruce
there
Perry.
you go. About that and how critical like the first messages we receive are as we
Yeah.
progress into adulthood, and which is why like these picture books are so important. If we can teach our children early their significance, the significance of the contributions of their ancestors and elders, like how does that change their journey going forward in terms of self-esteem, in terms of spirituality and connectedness to the one,
Yeah,
I love being a part of that possibility.
yeah, for sure. So I've thought a lot about as well, like this last, whatever, 12, 18 months, it all runs together at this point. I don't even know what day it is. I really don't know what day it is. I think it's Thursday. Um, but I mean, the whole year has been sort of filled with grief,
Yes.
right? But not just pandemic grief. In the US, there's also this like wellspring of, hey, we're having a conversation. We are finally going to actually talk about what's happening
Yes.
in the Black community with the degradation and violence of humans in
Yes.
this, not only the people of color, indigenous people,
Yes.
Asian Americans,
Yes.
the entire community, but certainly in the Black community,
Mhm.
and this like discussion,
Mhm.
right? And there is part of that discussion that is about grief as well,
Yes.
right? It's a
Yeah.
huge part of the discussion. And so I'm curious how you think in terms of what Aisha and this discussion brings to the table
Yeah.
for sort of in this moment, right? This really kind of clear moment that is a lot about grief and how we carry it, right? How do
Absolutely.
you
Thank
think
you
this
for that.
story talks about it?
I love that question. I love that question. Part of what motivated me to sit with this project and care for it enough to bring
Yeah.
it to life is there was a vacuum in that space. How do you talk to children about loss, about grief? And like you said, there is such a collective grief we're experiencing. In addition to the personal losses, COVID has hit communities of color, disproportionately so. There's a lot of grieving. Black folks are doing, like you said, other people of color. Um, so how do you talk about it? And the way I'm bent, the way my upbringing dictates that I talk about things like loss and grief and death is with hope
Yeah.
that like I can't believe that it's the period at the end of the sentence,
Right.
right? Like I believe that there is something more, something other, something hopeful and eternal. And that shapes how have these conversations. And so what role do I believe that this book about, honoring great Granny on her birthday, even though she has already transitioned, what I believe it brings to the conversation is again, like the question of, is there more to only this life experience? And if there is, how do we reflect that more in this life experience? How do we reflect joy and hope and those eternal aspects now so that we can create a more joyful, hopeful now? Like I love that conversation. It has driven so much of my life since I was a little girl,
Yeah.
raised in the church, right? Like having conversations about God and heaven and spirit and Yeah, I mean, it's just my
Yeah.
DNA.
No, totally. I mean, we were little girls in church with pastor fathers who knew that when someone died, you were allowed to be sad, but you were also grateful that they'd gone to glory.
Right, right.
They were with Jesus and they were
Right,
with their family and they were, and so you were like, you could be sad, but you could only be so sad.
right.
Right. But I think that when you're on the other side of that and it's our dads,
Yeah,
right? Then you're like, whoo, at least I know he's where he wants to be.
right. Absolutely.
Right. Like,
Yeah.
so there's that. And I think that certainty and that feeling, it's one thing when you're raised in an environment with that. But
Yes.
there are all kinds of children who may
Absolutely.
not be having those kinds of
Yeah.
conversations.
And
Right.
this is so neat. Like when I consulted um with Elemi Gale of Yale Botanica. I love her, her online personality. She's equally sweet. You know, I've only met her on the phone, but she's an angel. And we talked about Leah, like what you just said. Like we were raised in the church, and there are those cultural norms and rituals and practices and ceremonies, but like there's a world that exists outside of that environment, and it looks like other practices that venerate the same things, the same ideas, right? And so a part of my goal for this book is to not only make room for those practices, but to normalize them as Vacation Bible School was for me, right? Like as
Absolutely.
taking communion on the first Sunday of every month was for me. It's like there is room for all kinds of beliefs, especially when we understand there's so much in common between them,
Oh,
you
totally.
know? And ancestor veneration, like when you read the Old Testament and so begot so and so who begot so and so, what is that if not ancestor
Right.
veneration? Like,
And even like in a lot of religious traditions, the concept of that you could shame your ancestors by your behavior is
yes,
huge, right? Like you do that, David's not going to be happy,
right,
right? And you do that, Muhammad's not going to be happy. And
right,
this is all of that is, I mean, that's a huge part of our religious mindset, no matter what that religion is,
right,
right?
yeah,
And I mean, this idea, like, how do we now take, as with most religions, how do you take the shame out of it and actually make it a conversation
absolutely.
you're having with these people in your life, right? Like I know that you've had these experiences too, but um, like when I first moved to Berlin, one of the things that I struggled with was this idea. My dad died right before I moved, and I had this struggle for a couple months of he's never going to know I lived in Berlin,
Yes.
right? And then the very first time I came to Berlin, I was walking. I was actually at the memorial to the murdered Jews, right? And I was at this, and it's very austere, and it's I mean
Mhm.
it does what it's supposed to do,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
And I was walking through there, and it was like a hush and a whisper of like, I'm here.
Mhm.
I know what Berlin's like because I'm with you,
Yes.
right? And every time I'm in this city, a city he never went to, that as far as I know,
Yeah.
he goes for a walk,
Yes.
right?
Absolutely.
And so I know you've had those experiences too, but we don't talk about them,
No.
right? And we certainly don't help our kids understand them because they have those, I mean, they're even closer to it, having recently only gotten here,
Yeah.
right? So how do you make space for kids to talk about it? And I think it's such an important part of what
Yeah.
you're doing with these stories. So
And if we can permit them at a young age,
yeah.
right, the muscle they develop, as they continue to get older and wiser and have more life experience, it's a north to always come back to, right? I love you shared that with me, your experience in Berlin with the presence of your father, right?
Yeah.
I had a friend who's Buddhist and told me when my great aunt died, Aunt Vera, I think she was 99 or 100. She lived a ripe old age. And he said
Yeah.
to me, when people are alive, we experience them physically. But when they have transitioned, we experience them whenever we want. And
Right.
it's the memory, right?
Yeah.
It's just the acknowledgement, like there is a limitlessness there. All of a sudden, you're not
Mhm.
confined to this body in a phone call or a Zoom call or a FaceTime or a Teams meeting, right? Like it's now you're just in my thoughts and I can just call you up
Yeah.
and be with you, you know? And that's a part of what I worked really hard and what I believe the illustrator, Stephen, successfully conveyed is there's a line that says, Matthew is talking to Aisha, God bless you. And he says, you know, when you smile, I see great Granny smile, and I know that she's nearby, right? It's the
Yeah.
look that my sons will make that reminds me of their papa,
Yeah.
right? It's the expression on the face or something said or the way you move your body that is evident that you are begat by so and so, begat by so and so, begat by so and so,
Yeah.
right? This lives in us.
Yeah.
And this is just bringing an awareness to that, this book.
For sure. I mean, I saw Aaron boxing.
That is his papa.
Where'd he get that?
Exactly. That is his papa.
I
Papa,
mean, a
back in
kid
the
can hit a
day,
bag,
Papa would put you on your back if you wouldn't,
right?
if you weren't real careful.
Yeah, but I mean, a kid can hit a bag. I don't know where he learned how to do that, right? So I was like, oh, that's a thing.
That's
You
right.
know, it's not like it's Ryan's habit,
Right.
right? So,
Absolutely.
so it's. I was like, oh, all right, that's
Yeah.
happening. So,
It's real.
yeah, no, but I love that. I love that. So, when you started the process of this, like
Mhm.
when you said, because I mean, when, like I said, going back to a year and a half ago when I was in your house and you were like, this
Yeah.
altar means something to me. This is
Yeah.
what I do with it every day. And
Yeah.
now, what it felt like at the time was it was sort of starting to invade all of your creativity, right? And you were
Yes.
like, what am I going to do with everything I'm learning, right?
Mhm.
So, what was that process like to go from I'm practicing this practice of ancestor veneration to I want to write about this.
Yeah.
What was that like for you?
It's good. So when we first moved into our other condo, there was this wall and it was just asking for what I told Mark. He's like, I want an ancestor gallery. I didn't know ancestor altars were a thing. I
Yeah.
was like, I want like our pictures of our ancestors on the wall. And I at that point I didn't have any, right? I didn't even have any pictures of my great grandmothers and my great grandfathers. I do now. It's like once you set the intention, like the universe would be like, what'd you say? And you and work with you, right? So um and then I started I don't know really what the seed of sort of ancestor veneration, but I was just following some spiritualist on Twitter and I'm like, oh, that's a phrase I haven't heard. And so I would Google that and it just curiosity just, you know, promoted more curiosity. And I and I thought, okay, well, what are the elements that they're suggesting needs to be on an altar? And so I, you know, a little Amazon here, a little Etsy there, a little like calling my aunts and saying, do you have any pictures you could send to me? And restoring like these badly damaged pictures professionally. And, you know, like, and it became this really joyful devotional thing like I'm going to put this an altar together and it's going to have my Bible that is inscribed by my father to me. It's going to have snuff, tobacco. My grandmother loved to put snuff in her.
Mine too.
I can't do it, but sure.
My granny did that too.
It's so funny. It's good, you know, like so these elements that reflect the spiritual practice like it has a weapon on it like if you need your ancestors to go to war for you you need to equip them right like
Right.
it has water is a conduit for spirit like a mirror is it has flowers and crystals and something to represent planet earth and ground and you know yeah, so we have air with the fire and incense and water and earth and ooh air fire water earth. That's it right I think I
Yeah,
think
so,
those are the elements.
right.
Anyway, there's something,
Yeah.
right?
I think
Air.
that's right.
Yeah, now I'm tripping. Anyway, there's something of every element on the
Yeah.
altar. And my practice with them is to get up in the morning, like I make coffee for myself, I make them a cup of coffee. And I will read a scripture to my ancestors. Their pictures are on the wall. I will talk to them about what's going on in our family. Like it's building and cultivating a relationship. And and it's not one-sided. I don't know how to say that without sounding crazy, but I'm okay also with sounding crazy.
Right.
It's
Right.
lucid dreams where I work things out, right? Like it's coincidences that feel a little too coincidency. Right. And so it's been a joyful relationship that I'm developing. And it's put them in a flesh and blood light for me. Like it's one thing to say, oh, my great grandma Lena, blah, blah, blah. It's another thing to know, oh, she had 3 sons. 2 of them were imprisoned. The other, my grandfather, was a preacher. Like to put into context in her lifetime, what was it like to have 2 of your sons in jail? And what were they in jail for? And was it fair? Was it justice? Or was it just American BS, right? Like,
Right.
so
No.
these are, it brings to life for me, my ancestors, and it gives me compassion and it gives me a sense of duty and obligation to further their lives through me,
Yeah.
right? And then my
Oh,
son,
yeah.
and then their
I
grandson,
mean,
you know.
what's interesting for me is I think as you talk about it, and even as I've had some of those similar experiences when I think about some of my ancestors and my dad's mother and grandmother and on both sides of my family, there's these moments when as you're thinking about them or dreaming of them or discussing them, it almost feels like they can take a breath and be like,
Yes.
I'm
I'm
alive.
remembered. I'm remembered.
Right. I exist
Yeah.
and I am here, right? And it's like you give them, it's almost like you give them daylight, right? And that feeling of like, I love the notion that people who are on the other side who feel long forgotten
Yes.
have a moment of they may not know my name,
Yes.
but I'm here,
Yes. Leah,
right?
and this is a common thing. It's that Disney or Pixar, the Coco movie, like
Oh,
it,
yeah.
where it's like they do the ofrenda and they're remembering their ancestors.
Yeah.
It's called ancestor elevation when you remember them. And when I tell you this, and this is true because you were one of the few people
Right.
in my immediate circle as my father was transitioning, and I got the privilege of assisting him in his transition. He kept saying to me, remember, remember. And I have made it my life's mission to, whenever that word comes up, to perk up. Like, is it going to be a breadcrumb to what he was asking me to remember? And it has a broad application, right? Remember him.
Yeah.
Remember why I'm here. Remember, like, mindfulness. Like, it's just
I mean,
like,
we were raised in the world of remember who you are and whose you are,
yes,
right? Like the remember means everything, right? So
it means
yeah,
everything.
it
And I
has. It's a
feel like so much of this life is, like you were saying earlier, how kids are closer to source, so they have an easier time accessing it.
yeah,
Um, like, are we born trying to remember where we came from, right? Like, so there's a threshold, I think, as we get older where we're trying to unlearn,
yeah,
to go back to
yeah,
the beginning,
yeah,
to remember the beginning. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, we see that in the trajectory of people's lives, right? There's that as you get closer to the end, you take on some of these. Your joy is sometimes this very childlike joy,
Yes. Yes.
right? And we see it in people as they age, and I mean, even as I age, and I don't think I'm ancient, but as I age, I find joy in things that I think I had long ignored.
Yes.
And then I'm like, oh, that was nice and fun. And I'll find myself giggling or enjoying something. And then I'm like, okay, that is not something that I paid any attention to 10 years ago. Right.
Absolutely.
And it's like you look for these little nuggets of bliss.
Yes.
And kids don't have to be told to look for nuggets of bliss.
Right.
Right. So I think that circle is so interesting of kind of, babies all the way to the elderly.
Yeah.
And then once you're on the other side of it, I can just imagine there is this relief of I'm not carrying the burden of gravity.
Yes.
But I need to help you because you are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's really what I believe our ancestors desire. Like, remember me, I'm alive in you. Yeah. And let me help you out. I know some things. You idiot. Like, don't do that. You might want to do this instead.
Amazing. Amazing. So maybe talk a little bit about why you chose to self-publish in this situation.
So I submitted the manuscript. I did a couple things. I had some beta readers, parents with kids. Yeah, yes. You certainly.
I consider myself the primary beta reader of everything you write.
Of everything. And the feedback I got was, oh my gosh, this is solid. Like, and it makes me feel. And I wasn't expecting to cry. But it's a tender sweetness, right? And it's super niche. It's very niche. And so I was like, I'm gonna submit to some agents. I'll take that approach initially. Yeah. And I got rejection. And then I'm just at the age. And yeah, it's just no for me. Like, no one is gatekeeping anything I do. And I approach a lot of my life that way, right? Like, when I started singing jazz in Seattle, like, no one's going to tell me that I'm not going to do this, right? Like, I'm going to do it just because I want to. And so I have this thing in me that's very sort of goal driven with creative things. Now, professionally, I do anyway. So now corporate America. So I was like, I want to do this. The only investment is my joy, right? I remembered Elizabeth Gilbert's Big Magic, like the burden we place on our creativity to sustain us. I don't have that. I can just be creative and enjoy. And that's what I did. And of course, again, you set the intention, and all of a sudden your friend who's an illustrator is like, you wrote a book? What's it about? Tell me about it. And the next thing you know, he's,
he's crazy talented.
The illustrations in this book, I mean, I can't even. So this is just one of the breathtaking, like, I don't know, it's just
so good.
Gorgeous. I am
the detail, like when she's talking to her auntie and the auntie has on the perfect earrings and the shoes and the detail is exceptional. I mean, he's so talented.
Detail is there's my father. That's my dad. Like,
it's so funny because in my notes I wrote, let's talk about how a man I know showed up on that last page.
The great Reverend Robert Andrew Kennard. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I mean, the presence and the motivation for all of this.
Yeah. How was, since you have written other things, how was this different for you than writing a song or a novel or a blog or all the other ways that you use words?
Yes.
How was this different for you?
So I first want to talk about how it was the same.
Okay.
Right. Like what has to be present for me in creative expression, and it's true even of performing live.
Yes.
Because that is a spontaneous act of creating, even if it's a song written, in the 1920s, right? Like in the performance of it, it's a now creative moment.
Yep.
And Leah, what is always present when I know that I'm doing it correctly is there is just this almost like giddy joy, like this giddiness, like, oh God, we're in the zone. This is it. This is that zone. And I get it if I'm writing an Instagram post that feels meaningful. I get it if I'm writing a book, a novel. I get it if I'm writing a picture book, a song. And usually I just need, if I stay out of the way long enough, if I can just get out of my own way and enter into that joy, it just comes. The discipline is allowing it if it comes at 3 in the morning. Like, get up, girl, get up and follow the muse, because she will leave you. She will take off.
She's not gonna stay.
Like, because I know it's going to be a process. I know it's going to take time. And I can be so prone to instant gratification so this has been an act of patience, because it's not only me, I'm collaborating with an illustrator who has his own creative processes and his own interpretation. So how is this different? I wrote the words and he interpreted them. Right. And so I had to relinquish a little bit of my control, right? I had to go, okay, I trust what you're doing.
Here's my baby. Don't drop it.
Here's my baby. Dress it, right? Like, so it was different in that it was probably more collaborative. Yeah. In a long term. Like, so when I co-write songs, I don't play an instrument, but I hear all of it. Right. So that process is a little the same. I'll sing something, they'll play it. They're like, yeah, no.
Not quite, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so that was a little bit the same, but honestly, a picture book is an exercise in word economy as opposed to a novel, right? Like you talk about a novel and maybe you describe, the flowers that were smelling of spring in Paris that one afternoon you took a romantic walk with your lover. You don't say any of that in a picture book. You say the flowers, you just say there were flowers, and then the illustrator puts the nose to the petal and illustrates the reverie. Like, so it's word economy. And then when you add rhyme to it, it's a totally different, it's a different practice, right? It's a different discipline. And I've enjoyed evolving in that way.
Sorry about my bells, everyone, but I got my own set of bells. Sorry if you can hear them. But yeah, no, I think that it's super. It was interesting for me because I obviously saw the words first, right? Yeah. And then to start to see the pictures come to life slowly as you would send me a, like, this is one, what do you think? And it was like, oh, he's getting there. Like, he's doing the thing. He's nailing it, right? So I think it's such a cool, like you said, it's like there is a relinquishing a bit of that and saying like, okay, you can have the thing. What's funny about something you just said, so I want to say this for others who might come to my blog for other reasons, right? When you were talking about your creative process and what it feels like, what's really interesting for me, and like I write and I do all these other different things, but even when I'm, I spend most of my life in the software development space building things for people, right? But when I know it's right, same thing. It's the same feeling. When I put an idea on paper and say, this is where this product is going, and I show it to the founders or to my team, and everybody's like, oh, okay. Yeah. Got of that. Samesies. I know you hadn't, right? Like, and so it's similar, like in my situation where I work for co-founders of a company, and my job is to turn their vision into tangible, feelable, touchable product, right? And so they have had to relinquish pieces of their vision to the person who can actually make it real, right? I then have to relinquish it to engineers who can write code and make it come out their fingertips, the thing I want. right? And this process. And but I think, and the same feeling like when I have stood in front of an audience and talked about curiosity or talked about failure, there
Mhm.
is a moment when the audience and I are like, I'm like, oh, this is happening.
Yes, it's beautiful.
And
It's
it, but you know,
beautiful.
it's the same creative. I think everybody has to figure out what it is in them that creates that moment
Yeah,
of
yeah,
like, oh, that feels good.
yeah. And I want to live there. And you
Yeah.
can't. You can't because you have to eat, right? Like
Yeah,
you gotta
exactly.
sleep. You
You
gotta go to
sometimes you
your,
got to go to meetings.
yeah, right. Like you gotta write emails, all that stuff. But it does give you something to aspire to, something
Yes.
to, and it's a weird dance between something to chase
Yeah.
and something to allow.
Yes.
Because you can't chase it down. It's not that kind of, but you do have to desire it,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then you have to allow it, like to, and it's, I don't know how to, it's almost as if, well, this is probably a good analogy because we don't live everyday closeness with our grandkids, right?
Right.
As they were, when they were younger, I never assumed when we would come for a visit that they would know that I'm Lala and we are going to have a special relationship. I
Mm-hmm.
never assumed that.
Right.
I would I would want their closeness. I can't wait till they climb in my lap.
Yeah.
But I would have to wait for them to approach for the intimacy, right? Like I didn't want to ever be like, let me pick him up and you're like, you don't know me really, right? You will. I
Yeah.
know that.
Yeah.
And I'm going to allow you to set the tone. But here's where I'm going to vibrate. I'm going to
Yeah.
be your favorite person.
Yeah.
You're going to love me so much.
Yeah. Exactly.
Like it's, and then there's the meeting of the two,
Yeah. Yeah.
allowing, pursuing. Yeah.
And I think what's interesting in saying that is I feel that in the story when there's this moment where Aisha's crying
Yes.
and her dad says, "Yeah, that's okay."
It's okay.
Right? You're
Yeah.
supposed to like that's fine for you to be sad.
Yeah.
And we're going to make her a cake and have a party.
Absolutely.
Right? And so it's that, so to me it's that similar, like she's saying in that story, she's saying, "Oh, I want that relationship and I'm sad that she's gone."
Yeah.
And he's saying, "But you do have a relationship."
Absolutely.
Right? And you, child, now can set the pace of that relationship.
Absolutely.
They've introduced this little girl in the book to
Yeah.
this ancestor,
Yeah.
and now she can have that relationship and at the pace that makes sense, right? So I think
Absolutely.
it's super interesting. Like I love that.
I
I love
love
that.
it so much. I'm so thankful to my ancestors. Yeah.
Exactly.
So
So
thankful.
what's the future? What's the future of this series look like?
Yeah. So Aisha and the ancestors, we have if the universe is a grocery store, we have we have filled the cart. Obviously more books. We already have two manuscripts that are done and they're waiting for illustration and publication and that whole thing. We have a book on jazz and the contributions that African Americans have made to jazz music. We have one celebrating Juneteenth. We have the ABCs of Aisha's World. We have affirmation cards, which will be the next thing that we develop, bring to the public. Um, then I want to like move on to chapter books for older readers.
Yeah.
Great Ganny has a botanica called Powder and Rose. I'm going to bring that into 3D reality and sell
Amazing.
like candles and tinctures and all
Oh
of these
yes.
things with Aisha and her world. So yeah, like I'm dreaming big, like activity books, coloring books.
Yeah.
When the world continues to open up safely, like I would love to be able to get in front of kids and read with them. And
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm having a great time
I love it.
feeling a lot of freedom around the
Yeah.
vision I've placed around Aisha and the ancestors. And yeah, like we are getting our ducks in a row to make a very significant impact on little ones. Yeah.
I love it. I love it so much. I think there's so much here and so much that it can speak to. Like I mean, I'm living in a city that is haunted by a lot of ghosts.
Yeah, sure.
And so for me, the idea of this series and of these books
Yeah,
teaching us how to have some of these conversations and how to change the story and the dialogue for the next generation. Certainly in our home country, but also in other places,
yeah,
right? There's
yeah.
lots of places where the stories can really spread their wings. So
I love it. Leah, thank you. Thank you for your blog. Thank you for your voice in your industry. Thank you for being an example of just sort of the commitment to excellence and innovation and growth as a woman in the spaces you occupy. It is so permissive what you are exemplifying. So thank you for that. And thank you that as you hold that in one hand, you hold this incredible creativity in your own writing, in your own life's expression, in your spirituality. Like I we owe Tyler a drink, if nothing more, for
fine, Tyler, we'll buy you a drink.
having introduced us those many years ago.
Maybe we could, I know, let's go to Amsterdam and buy him a drink.
I think we should do that.
Okay.
I've been
I mean,
vaccinated.
right
As
now,
soon
but
as you're
as soon as we
vaccinated, let's go. Thank
Awesome.
you so much for this opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. Super fun. Thank you for sharing Aisha with us
Yeah.
and sharing how you got to Aisha with us.
Okay.
So appreciate it.
Well,
And I love her and I love you.
I love you too. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yes.
And yeah, I'll talk to you next week.
All right.
I love you. Have a good day.
Yeah, you too.
Listen to the kitty cat.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.